Welcome to episode 7 of Nonlinear Storybits. Today we're going to look a little bit more into Ming Chao history or Ming dynasty history, specifically about Emperor Chen Hua or Chen Huadi and maybe his nanny complex, and also Wonder Boy Zhu Youtang. Chen Huadi or Zhu Jiansheng was the 9th emperor of Ming dynasty who ruled from 1464 to 1487. So Emperor Chen Hua is his era name. His temple name is Ming Xianzong. But to understand his story a bit more, we have to jump back one generation to his father, Ming Yingzong, who was the 6th emperor, Zhentong Huangdi, and also the 8th emperor, Tianshun Huangdi, which will be a very interesting point to look at in a bit, and also his uncle, Zhu Qiyu, or Ming Jingdi, the 7th emperor of Ming dynasty. The whole story starts when Zhu Qizhen became the 6th emperor in 1435. He declared his name as Zhentong, and which basically means an upright reign or rule. So his temple name is Ming Yingzong. His era name is Zhentong Huangdi, which we mentioned in episode 2 of Nonlinear Storybits. So from 1435 to 1449, Zhu Qizhen can also be called Zhentong Huangdi. When he ascended to the throne, Zhu Qizhen was actually just an 8-year-old boy. I don't know what you were doing when you were 8, but I was definitely not in charge of operating a country. So because Zhu Qizhen was born into an imperial family though, the kind of cards you get dealt with really isn't something that you can control. But because he was also so young, he also easily trusted and listened to other people, which really isn't necessarily a bad thing. But what was bad was that one person took advantage of this and sent a flourishing Ming dynasty basically into bankruptcy, both financially and also in talent or people. So who is that person? That person is a eunuch called Wang Zhen. He was a close confidant of the young emperor, and to satisfy his own ego, decided that he himself, with absolutely no military training, was going to orchestrate and lead 200,000 Ming troops to war against the Northern Mongolian or tribe leader, Essen Taishi. Since Wang Zhen himself also knew that no military general or troops were actually going to listen to him because he had no reputation in the military, he brainwashed Zhu Qizhen, the emperor, to also come along on this military campaign. That way, as the emperor's eunuch who had to go along with him, he could rely on Zhu Qizhen's authority as emperor to command the army. His vision was that he was going to command this great army, win the battle, and come home as a hero that everyone would look up to. Except that was just a dream. In reality, at the Battle of Tumu Fortress, which was an embarrassment in Chinese history, Essen Taishi's army of less than 50,000 troops decimated the 200,000 Ming troops. And even worse, Emperor Zhu Qizhen himself was also captured as prisoner of war. And to add on to the situation, Essen Taishi was almost about to break into the capital city of Beijing. Dire situations call for drastic measures, and the Ming Dynasty court was in a serious, dire position. The Ming Dynasty court now had no emperor, no military in the capital to defend itself because everybody was out at Tumu Fortress. So what was going to happen? Well, at that moment, Yu Qian, official of the military cabinet, stepped up to save the day. He convinced the imperial court officials and also the brother of Zhu Qizhen, Zhu Qiyu, who was the regent at that time, to become emperor so that Zhu Qizhen's value as a hostage would be decreased and prevent Ming dynasty from having to fully liquidate all of its assets in an attempt to ransom back Zhu Qizhen. He was also able to summon just enough troops just in time to defend Beijing from the Mongol attack. All in all, if it wasn't for Yu Qian, we'd be looking at a very different course in Chinese history. So at this point, Zhu Qizhen, previously Mingzong Emperor Zhentong, was now Emperor Emeritus because Zhu Qiyu was now emperor as Emperor Jingtai or Ming Jingdi. Although Zhu Qizhen and Zhu Qiyu may have been brothers in the past, this wedge of emperor between them quickly soured the relationship. After Zhu Qizhen was eventually returned back to Ming Dynasty by the Mongols a year later after his capture. When Zhu Qizhen was returned to Ming Dynasty, Zhu Qiyu was afraid that Zhu Qizhen, his brother, would try to reclaim the throne. So Zhu Qiyu, the current emperor, or Ming Jingdi, put Zhu Qizhen under house arrest. Then, in the turn of events 8 years later, though, Zhu Qizhen led a palace coup against Zhu Qiyu, and oh, how the tables turned. Zhu Qiyu was now the disposed emperor, and Zhu Qizhen was now the emperor again, except instead of being called Emperor Zhentong, because this was his second reign, he changed it to Tianshun. And so in this second time period, he is called Tianshun Huangdi, even though his temple name is still Ming Yingzong. So how does this all relate to Zhu Jianshen or Ming Xiandi? Well, when his father, Zhu Qizhen, was in his first reign, Zhu Jianshen, at the tender age of 2, was already crowned as the crown prince. Therefore, when Zhu Jianshen's uncle, Zhu Qiyu, became the emperor and house arrested Zhu Qizhen, Zhu Jianshen's actual father, Zhu Jianshen himself was in a pretty awkward position. He was the crown prince, but he was not of a direct lineage of the current emperor, his uncle, Zhu Qiyu. And eventually, when Zhu Qiyu had his own son, Zhu Jianshen was further removed, and completely removed, actually, from being crown prince. So we now have this 2-year-old toddler in the palace who had no potential, could bring no future benefits to other people, and unsurprisingly, although it doesn't make it any less sad, he really did not get any love or attention from anyone. His mother couldn't really come see him. His father was under house arrest. His uncle got him removed as crown prince and was trying to make his own son next in line. And all the palace maids and servants turned a blind eye to him. In this dark and lonely place, cue that dramatic music, the only person that cared any bit for him was his nanny. Zhu Qizhen's mother, the current Empress Dowager, Sun Taihou, or Empress Dowager Sun, could not prevent the new emperor, Zhu Qiyu, her second son, from ousting out her first son, Zhu Qizhen, as the emperor, and could not prevent Zhu Qiyu from ousting out Zhu Jianshen as the crown prince, but she did send over a nanny to Zhu Jianshen to protect him. Whether it was because she genuinely cared or there were some other political underlying motives, that's up for debate, but the end result is that this nanny, who was 19 years old at that time, was the one who reared, protected, and showed Zhu Jianshen motherly love. As mentioned before, eventually Zhu Jianshen's father, Zhu Qizhen, was eventually reascended to the throne as Emperor Tianshun, and Zhu Jianshen himself was also reinstated back as the crown prince. When Zhu Qizhen died at the age of 38, Zhu Jianshen became the 9th Ming Dynasty emperor. This was in 1464. When Zhu Jianshen became emperor, the first thing this 17-year-old did was to make his 17-year-older nanny, who was 34 at that time, for those who don't want to do the math, his imperial concubine, Wen Guifei, or Lady Wen. And boy, was Wen Guifei a force to be reckoned with. Because Zhu Jianshen was reliant on her in his most desperate times, she was the one who had his heart, who just was the one that Zhu Jianshen always had to rely on. Because she knew that she was 17-year-old Zhu Jianshen's favorite consort too, she punished anyone who challenged her power and authority, but most importantly, her place in Zhu Jianshen's heart. It was an unspoken reign of terror in Zhu Jianshen's inner court, or a collected term to describe all the consorts and concubines of the emperor. Anybody who became pregnant with the emperor's child had two outcomes. Either through some means or another, the child was killed, whether it was born or unborn, or through some means or another, the child and the mother were both killed. And it was no good to try to rebel against Wan Guifei. The empress at that time, Wu Huanghou, or Empress Wu, relying on her strong family standing and background in court, one time called Wan Guifei over and said some harsh words and potentially slapped Wan Guifei's face in the middle of their little talk. The next thing she knew, Zhu Jianshen disposed Empress Wu 1 month after she was coronated as the empress. All in all, the underlying rule in the inner court was, if you wish to survive, don't cross the path of Wan Guifei. She held an iron grip on both the inner court and Zhu Jianshen's heart. What she didn't know was that a crack was growing in her iron grip. And the crack had been growing ever since the early Chenhua years, or the early reign of Zhu Jianshen. Chenhua is Zhu Jianshen's era name. To look at this, we need to zoom out to Guangxi, which is way down south from Beijing, the capital city. Down there was a viceroy, or governor general, named Han Yong. Why was he down in Guangxi? Well, it was because there were some conflicts and tension between those southern minority tribes and the Ming dynasty, and it had gotten to the point that it was spilling over to the other provinces. Why didn't the Ming government nip the rebellions in the bud before it had gotten to this degree? Well, this rebellion was all happening while the Ming dynasty was also dealing with the Oirat Mongol tribes that was going to potentially capture the capital, and also had Zhu Jianshen, their current emperor then, as prisoner of war. So at that time, there just was not the people, the military, and most importantly, money to deal with anything else. But now that things have gotten a bit better, the rebellion down in Guangxi needed to be taken care of ASAP. Guangxi is a very mountainous region with steep ravines and gorges. One of the most treacherous gorges was called Da Teng Xia. Da, large, Teng, vine, Xia, canyon. Da Teng Xia, or large vine canyon, because of the large vines that was spanning across the canyon were very thick and very big, so therefore people called it Da Teng Xia. When Han Yong came in to Guangxi in 1464, all prepared to, ready for the front lines for battle, tens and hundreds of scholars suddenly came before him, requesting Han Yong to let them enlist in his army because Han Yong's arrival meant that they could finally be relieved from the threat of these tribal forces. Han Yong's troops were overjoyed. They were actually just at a loss on how to find their way in these mountains and jungle forest. And since these scholars were local people, they would be able to help direct them. How convenient. They came just at the right time. However, when Han Yong saw these people kneeling in front of him, he immediately ordered his soldiers to tie up all these people right then and there. They are all rebels. I mean, military orders, right? Even though his troops were doubtful at first, they tied them up anyways. It's not like it's their responsibility as soldiers to question their military leader. I mean, Han Yong is the one who said this, right? But when these soldiers actually searched these so-called scholars, they indeed found out that all of them were actually hiding weapons. They were spies sent by the rebel forces. When the other officials asked Han Yong, "How did you identify them as spies?" Han Yong replied, "Guys, where are we? We are in the middle of nowhere, and this nowhere happens to be infested with rebel forces. No scholar in their right mind, let alone tens and hundreds of scholars, would stay in this area to study about Confucius and Mencius and etiquette and rights." With this first show of a hand, Han Yong's smarts spread to the ears of the tribal leaders. They thought that Han Yong had some special abilities or something, and their troop morale fell down. So when Han Yong led his 5-way attack strategy to the tribal leaders' main forces, The tribal forces were easily defeated and surrendered to Hanyong. As Hanyong stood on the top of this ravine, looking at the vine that spanned across Datengsha, this Dateng, or large vine, which happened to be something that the tribes worshipped, Hanyong asked one of the tribal leaders, so what is this vine for? The tribal leaders replied, this vine is a blessing by our God. It only shows up in the night. During the day, it cannot be found. Personally, I think there was probably some serious fog action going on at Datengsha or something, but Hanyong nodded his head. And probably to make a statement, he was like, we'll see who is the true God. And probably also for future battle strategies, to cut off the tribe's means of escape or mode of attack in the future, Hanyong chopped off this vine and aptly renamed this canyon from Datengsha to Duantengsha, Duan meaning broken vine canyon. And this was the famous Datengsha Qi, or rebellion of the large vine canyon, the rebellion of Datengsha. So how does this whole thing instigate a crack in Wan Guifei's power? Well, the rebellion of Datengsha itself didn't really do anything, but it was that there were two important people that came out from this rebellion. Because Hanyong successfully pacified this Guangxi region and local rebellion, as it was the custom of that time, he selected a few decent-looking boys and girls to be sent to the palace. The girls would become palace maids and servants. The boys were castrated and became eunuchs. And this is where the crack began. One of the young ladies that got sent into the palace was a woman by the last name of Ji, or Ji Gongnu. Ji, palace maid. Gongnu meaning palace maid. Ji Gongnu was a quiet and educated woman and quickly got assigned to be a manager of a storeroom. Specifically, this storeroom was the emperor's private treasury, storing silks, gold, treasures, and more stuff that the emperor could personally use and gift to people at his own discretion and pleasure. One day, Zhu Jianshen, or Ming Xianzong, or Chen Huadi, decided to take a stroll to his private treasury. Maybe at the same time he was pondering, why do I have no sons even though I have so many consorts in my Neigong? I wonder why. When he arrived to the treasury, he started to ask Ji Gongnu about, what things were in his treasury, how much of X, how many of Y, who did he give X to, who did he give W to more, and so. Ji Gongnu was able to calmly and collectedly answer all of these questions. This caught Zhu Jianshen by surprise, and he took a second look at this lowly storeroom manager palace maid. And this was the second blow to Wan Guifei's iron grip. Quickly, Ji Gongnu found out that she was pregnant. To be honest though, she didn't know if this was good news or terrible news that would become her death sentence. She already had to experience leaving all of her family and hometown to travel across the country up north to Beijing to be a palace maid where death could easily be knocking on your door the next day. To add fuel to that fire, now she was pregnant in a palace in an era where no woman had ever successfully given birth. She kept as mum as possible, trying to avoid the eyes and ears of Lady Wan, or Wan Guifei. But one day, she saw someone walking toward her, and her blood froze. She recognized the palace maid. She was one of the head palace maids serving under Wan Guifei. I guess although Ji Gongnu tried every method in the book to hide her pregnancy, Wan Guifei still caught wind of it. When this head palace maid came, she coldly looked up and down at Ji Gongnu, and then she walked away. To this day, we don't really know why the head palace maid didn't follow through on Wan Guifei's orders, even though it was clear that she knew what the consequences would be if she didn't and disobeyed Wan Guifei. If she didn't kill the baby or Lady Ji and disobeyed Wan Guifei. Sometimes heroes just arrive in the most unexpected places with the most unexpected people, some who don't even have their name recorded down for us to know. But clearly, without this head palace maid's action, Ming dynasty history would be very different. Ji Gongnu was able to escape this time and successfully give birth to a son. But now she faced another dilemma. how was she going to raise her son? As a palace maid, her wages were low, her living quarters were not suitable for the growth of a child, and most importantly, how was she going to survive and, not die and raise an educated child with the watchful eyes of Wan Guifei? Quickly, Wan Guifei heard about the birth of this child and sent a eunuch, Zhang Ming, to poison the baby. How Wan Guifei dealt with the head palace maid, though, nobody really knows. Zhang Ming carried that bottle of poison and came to Ji Gongnu's living quarters. What he did next, though, would make Wan Guifei livid. He said, "This will not do. We must hide the child. You can hide from her this time, but next time you might not be so lucky. Let me take the child to the disposed Wu Huanghou, or Empress Wu, since if anything, she has money and the resources that can help you raise a child." And if you remember, the disposed Wu Huanghou, or Empress Wu, got herself disposed precisely because of Wan Guifei. And so whether it was for revenge or because she genuinely empathized with and sympathized with palace maid Ji, or Ji Gongnu, she took in the child and also Ji Gongnu. Zhang Ming went back to Wan Guifei and informed her that the child was dead. And so the child was able to grow up under not only the care and protection of Wu Huanghou and his mother, but virtually all the servants and palace maids in the palace. Almost every single servant and maid knew about this child, yet nobody let the secret out. He was the living proof of victory against Wan Guifei. Hundreds of unnamed servants served in this underground mission, and they were successful. Wan Guifei never heard about the existence of this child. Actually, neither did Emperor Zhu Jiansheng. As the years passed by, Zhu Jiansheng still could not have a son. He became increasingly worried and anxious. White hairs were appearing and he was starting to lose his hair. One day, while Zhang Ming was helping Emperor Zhu Jiansheng with his morning routine, Zhu Jiansheng again began lamenting about his lack of an heir. At this moment, Zhang Ming grew silent. Should he tell the emperor that he actually had a 5-year-old son already? If he did, that 5-year-old son would be able to become properly recognized by the emperor and the court, and also receive his rightful place as crown prince. But it would also mean his death was imminent. Wan Guifei would know that 5 years ago he lied to her about killing the child. After a brief moment, while Zhu Jiansheng was looking off to the distance, he suddenly heard a kapow. Turning around, he saw that Zhang Ming was kneeling on the ground and saying some strange words he couldn't quite comprehend. Zhu Jiansheng heard Zhang Ming say, "Your Highness, you have a son. You have a 5-year-old son." Zhu Jiansheng was shocked. "I have a son? I have a son? Wait, what did you say? I have a son? Where is he? Take me to him." Zhang Ming then told Zhu Jiansheng the whole story. Immediately afterwards, Zhu Jiansheng summoned that the child should be brought to him. When off in the distant disposed Empress Wu Palace, they received this order, everyone knew that the light has finally come. This child would finally be acknowledged by the world. But Ji Gongnu also knew that the day that she was going to die was also just around the corner. As she was dressing her 5-year-old son to meet his dad for the first time, she told him, "When you see that man that's dressed in yellow, he's your father." That 5-year-old child didn't know what this whole commotion was, but he remembered his mother's words, And when he was brought to Zhu Jiansheng's palace, he ran up to him, arms waving and hair flying behind him, shouting, "Daddy, Daddy." And so Zhu Jiansheng, after many, 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 many years of being a childless father, finally got the son he always wished for. And we in history get Emperor Hongzhi, a very important emperor in the course of Ming Dynasty history. So how did Wan Guifei take this? What happened to palace maid Ji? That will be told in another episode of Nonlinear Storybits.